DMR Books just put out a new collection by an author named Marquez Stern called Kingdoms Trembling, and it's pretty darn good. I'm going to make a video here to tell you about it and explain to you why I recommend you check it out, because I do recommend that you check this thing out. Kingdoms Trembling. The gist of this, it's a collection of 12 short stories. They're all in the same land. There's a different protagonist for the most part in each of the stories, and some of them are kind of intertwined, but they really do stand alone as independent stories, each of these 12. This land has a kingdom that's on the verge of collapse. There's corruption from within. There's two warring parties that are trying to take over. I say parties like they're kind of like revolutionary groups, more or less, the Greens and the Silvers, and they're battling each other for power and control. There's natural disasters going on, and then on top of all that, there's a plague that's beginning to spread. So this ancient kingdom is falling to pieces, and each of these 12 stories tells the tale of one of the remarkable people within this kingdom's land, and how that individual character is kind of struggling to survive and achieve their goals and carry on amidst all of this turmoil that is happening around them. I took a bunch of notes when I was reading this collection. I read it on digital, by the way, so I don't have a copy of the book to hold up for you. And that's fine by me because the older and older I get, the less stuff I want to have. I've been giving away books. I don't really have an interest in collecting a bunch of stuff any longer. So digital was fine for me, but I did take a bunch of notes because there's a lot of stuff. He builds worlds really interestingly. Mustafa Stern builds worlds interestingly. And I'm not a world building guy, so for me to say that kind of means a bit, because he sprinkles in the world building throughout the stories. And at the very end of this collection is kind of like a glossary of terms, like some of the creatures and some of the people and places and stuff like that. But I like it better that way because I hate having to read through like pages and pages or chapters of geography and history and stuff like that at the beginning of something. It just kind of puts me off. But he does it really well. And the world that he created is pretty neat. There's like some bizarre natural functions that take place, like sand spikes, which are like almost like stalagmites that you would see at the floor of a cave, but they're burst, like they jettison up, like they shoot out of the desert floor, and they're a hazard. So there's like certain pathways that people will know where to navigate to walk so they don't get struck by one of these sand spikes. There's certain things that connect the different locations in the world, called way channels, which are like portals, if you will. And there's a certain type of being that kind of controls and navigates those portals for different people. Sorcery is a big part of this collection, and he does it in a way that's interesting to me because he describes the sorcery almost in scientific terms. So it's almost like sorcery functioning in the confines of a rational existence. A lot of this stuff feels biological when it's really sorcery, but it's presented in such a way that has like a logical framework around it, which I think is unique. And all that's part of the world. So I'm talking about like the world that we have in these 12 stories, these Kingdoms Trembling stories. That world is, in my opinion, fairly unique in that way because it's fictional stuff wrapped in the structure of something that we could relate to in reality, if that makes sense. It makes sense to me. Malachi Stern does a really good job of creating kind of like a colorful palette of protagonists. Sometimes when you read a collection of Sword and Sorcery, it's just like one barbarian warrior after the other. And all of these, each story has some action and some fighting in it. Don't get me wrong, but there are swordsmen in these stories, obviously. But on top of that, you've got other types of characters like craftsmen and artisans and philosophers and members of royalty from the kingdom that is falling apart. All that kind of stuff makes it interesting. So each story is a bit unique. They're unified in that each of the protagonists is kind of trying to navigate their way through this falling empire, obviously, but The way that they do that, the means that they take are a bit unique because they do that based on what their attributes are. And they have different attributes. Not everybody's the same. Some of the characters are deeper than others in these stories, which makes it kind of an interesting read. And like I said, all of the stories have action in them. There's lots of fighting and there's lots of violence. Very, very gory at times. There's one character, I'm doing my best also to kind of dance around spoilers. I don't want to ruin any of these stories for you, but there is one of my favorite characters from one of my favorite stories who dies in such a profound manner at the hands of someone that used to be his friend that became his nemesis. And this person kills the protagonist in such a way to put him on display for everybody else. I've never read anything like it. It's one of those things like, I don't know if you were a psycho kid like I was. When I was in school, I used to just doodle people dying on paper in my notebooks and stuff in class or whatever, and the school getting blown up. I'm sure I would have been on a list if I was a kid in this day and age. They would have drugged me up pretty fast. But I used to always draw like different torture devices and stuff like that. You had one of those pens that had the 4 colors, and one of them was red, so you always had that handy to make blood and stuff. The way that this protagonist is killed by his former friend, then nemesis, to be put on display is the kind of things I would have loved to have drawn when I was a little kid. So lots of violence. And on top of that, the other thing that's in all of these stories is straight up weirdness. There's things like where I read the paragraph and I get a double take like, whoa, that actually just happened. That is bizarre. Or the way he describes some of the creatures and the way that their biology works is just weird and bizarre. Bordering on the realm of horror, possibly. I wouldn't say any of these stories have a strong horror element, although that is a component of Sword and Sorcery in general. These are probably less on the horror side, more on the weirder side of atmosphere and elements that supplement the sword and the sorcery action sequences that take place. And like I said, there is action in each story. And it's well described action as well. He has a good sense of placing the characters in a battle scene, what they're doing. He seems like he has a stronger understanding of like physiology. A lot of times I'm going on and on about this guy. I don't even know him at all. And I've read some of Mohammed Stern's stories in other collections, and I've always liked them. But this is the first thing I read of his that's like a whole thing. And I really do believe he's one of the better sword and sorcery authors out there now, because he does seem like he has an understanding of physiology. He knows how the body works. He knows if someone is fighting, how leverage plays into the fight and stuff like that. Have you ever been trying to tell a friend of yours about a story that you read, but you don't remember the title? Maybe the title just wasn't memorable or it just didn't click for you. So you need to tell them about the story based on what happens. Do you know what I mean? Like, let's say I was talking to Moby and I said, "Hey Moby, did you ever read that story? Oh geez, what was it called? It's the one where Ricky goes down to the mud bog and he gets in that fight with a golden doodle over that rawhide bone." Like that type of description of the story that's the titles of the 12 stories in this collection. "Hey John! Oh, come on, Ricky. You said my name. So what are you talking about? Are we going down to the mud bog?" No, we are not going to the mud bog, Ricky. Just relax for a second. I just mentioned your name as a reference because I'm talking about something else, about these collection of stories here. Is there any dogs? Any dogs in Kingdom's Trembling? Because I heard you reading it out loud, and I don't really recall you mentioning any dogs as you read it out loud. No, I don't think there's any dogs, but just go do something else for a minute. All right? I'm talking to these people here about this thing. I'm trying to explain how these stories are titled, okay? Jeez. So anyways, that's how these stories are titled. So you get an idea of what's going to happen in the stories by the title. The titles are very long. I told you all that to tell you about 2 of my favorite stories in this collection. And I got to reference them on paper. It's not that I don't remember what happens in the stories. It's the character names. The character names, I struggle with these things so badly, but that's a personal problem that I have. You probably won't have that problem. 2 of my favorite stories. Zirith returns to Ilnim to find his beloved kingdom in disarray. Zirith returns to Ilnim to find his beloved kingdom in disarray. What I like about this story is that this guy is like, he's a young person that's coming into adulthood, and he's destined to inherit his father's kingdom. His father has passed on. And there's a procedure when the new person takes over the kingdom. They have to place this special stone called a higher stone. Higher, like hierarchy. He has to place the stone in a certain position, and that officially transfers the power to him to lead these people. And I like this story a lot because Zirith is someone that struggles with that. He doesn't know if he's ready to do it yet. He's becoming a man. He's got doubts about himself, and he doesn't know if he could lead other people. And throughout the story, he kind of battles that hesitancy and is just reluctant to be the person that kind of like he's told he's supposed to be. And he comes into it naturally. I'm not going to give away the story, but I like that one a lot because I do like character growth in my stories. And sometimes Sword and Sorcery, the characters are very two-dimensional. You don't see a lot of change from one point to the other. This one in particular, you do see that change. And it's a type of pressure that protagonist is feeling that I think a lot of us can relate to. So that was one of my favorite stories. My ultimate favorite story from the collection, oh God, Sogzot. T-S-O-G-X-O-T. Sogzot. You can see hopefully you understand why I struggle with this. Sogzot brings art to the autarky of Dolorox. D-O-L-O-R-O-X. Dolorox. All of these words look freaking awesome on paper. Just so you know, when you're reading the book, I almost look at the words as like hieroglyphics. They're like a shape to me rather than an actual word. And I think that's cool. It makes it, but trying to say this stuff out loud, man, this is like damn impossible for me. But anyways, Sogzot brings art to the autarky of Dolorox. This one is really good though because it has very deep characters. This dude he's like, there's another cool word in these stories. One of the stories is a character who he was referred to as a heterodox. You know, like orthodoxy, heterodox is someone that just goes against what's normal, you know, different, the opposite of normal. Like, I guess like a homodox. A homodox would be someone that just goes with the flow and follows the rules and stuff like that. This character is a heterodox. And, well, not this character, not Sogzot. Sogzot is not well, he is, but his title is not a heterodox. There's another character in the stories who is officially titled a heterodox. Sogzot does demonstrate heterodoxy, though, in that he grew up with this other person. They were buddies, and they're growing up in his kingdom, and they always were like, they wanted to be revolutionaries. They wanted to upend like the religious practices of their ancestors and stuff like that. And Sogzot pursued that into adulthood, whereas his companion, even though he was saying that this is what he was all about, as he grew older, he went down the path of traditionalism. So it's a really cool story because it's a battle between traditionalism and, I hate to say the word progressivism because now that means something totally different. There's nothing political in any of these stories. Please don't get me wrong. There's an allegory to our time today, which I'll talk about later on, but there's nothing like, you can't say, oh, that's a Republican, oh, that's a Democrat or whatever. It's completely ambiguous, as it should be. That's the right way to write stories. These stories were crafted for the craft more so than any kind of like, you know, contemporary ideology or any of that BS. At any rate, these two guys, they go their separate ways, and the one that was like the progressive guy, if you will, he finds art, and he finds art through violence, which is a really, really cool way. I'm not going to give a lot of stuff away, but he becomes an artist with his sword, if you will. Okay. And he's just blown away by it because he had never seen art. He grew up in a culture where they didn't have color. It was a very gray color. And he wants to bring that back to his homeland. So he comes back to his homeland with the gift of art. He's going to give his people, you know, painting and culture and all this kind of stuff. He's all excited to do it. And then he comes back to find out that his old buddy decided to go the traditional route, and things are even more gray and more grim than they were before. It's a really, 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 really cool story. Certainly my favorite out of the bunch, because I like that sort of deep characters that have some thought behind them, not just thought, in terms of how like Michel Stern wrote the characters, but they're thinking characters. You read the pages and you're like, okay, this character is thinking about something. He's not just reacting. That kind of stuff I'm a real big fan of, and this story does it really well. Those are my two favorite stories. I don't do like ratings and stuff in these videos, but I'll break down Kingdom's Trembling into three categories: the good, the bad, and the ugly. Things I like, things I don't like, and things that are ugly. We'll figure it out as we go. So let's start by talking about the good. For me personally, the way that Stern writes, it just suits me very, very well. He writes with just enough words to get the point across, without going overblown with a bunch of adjectives and unnecessary description. You have a sense of what's going on, but not like a picture perfect sense of what's going on. That kind of ties back to like the weirdness element I mentioned before, because these stories are all quite weird. It allows you to sort of fill in the blanks. And he writes when he needs to write in a staccato fashion, he does so. And when it's appropriate to write beautifully, he does so as well. There's passages in these stories that are just beautiful prose. You could take them out of place from the context of the story and just read them on the merit of his use of words, and it's beautiful. But he only does that when it's necessary. It's not like you're reading just a bunch of poetry. I'm not sure if that makes sense. Hopefully it does, but there's a nuance there that he's managed to achieve. Let me just give you three examples of things that I just jotted these down. I could pick a bit from any story in this book and give you something pretty to listen to me read, but I'm just going to pull out three things that I remember jotting down and tell you why I like those. This is from the second story in the book, and the title is Phyrox Finds a Vengeful Path After Surviving the Storming of Ascot. Shield and sword in hand, horned helmet atop his head, something within Phyrox was soaring, singing. He was a single scream as bright as a tear of joy. He was his blade, and his blade was he, as he struck away the weapons of the enemies on which he advanced, slashing the guards, stabbing them, running them through, flash of the blade, whistle of its strike, perceiving those minuscule gaps where armor lifted and flesh peeked out, aiming that fraction of a breath ahead of them necessary to meet flesh. A dance in which for every move he was already a step ahead, his blade always finding its mark. Blood, singing, blood, ecstatic blood. Now clearly you can see why that rings a bell for me. I love that kind of writing. It is beautiful violence, beautiful when necessary, staccato when necessary. Really, really just wonderful, wonderful prose. And there's a lot of that kind of stuff throughout. All right, this next one is from the story I mentioned before. Zirith returns to Ilnim to find his beloved kingdom in disarray. What am I to learn from this, father? Zirith thought, petitioning, as he often did, the wisdom of Olatef long gone. For he had spent his life asking such questions of his absent father, where one more orthodox might ask the mighty star. Having only the vaguest memories of his father's reign, knowing only the tales of its firmness, virtue, and dignity that polished the rough jewel of the outer yachts, he felt it always his duty to resume that, to carry it forward, and do the man's legacy justice. But without his father's direct tutelage, he felt, on his life's most difficult days, adrift, searching to recreate something he had never seen. Again, a really beautiful piece right there. It kind of, you learn so much about that character Zirith just from that one paragraph. All right, last one. The distant memory of Vistadru, maker of instruments. This is a short one. This is a female protagonist from the stories, and she is someone that is a craftsman who makes exceptional musical instruments that have like secret things going on with them at the same time. And she's talking to someone about how she's able to do it. How is she able to bring these unique physical objects into existence? And she says, I look for the patterns in the world, and I give the world the tools to express them. Short and sweet, but again, very beautifully written. So yeah, I definitely like the prose a lot in this collection. That's definitely one of the good things. Probably the goodest of the good things is the way that Stern writes. Some other things I noted down, just kind of random things I liked. Sorcerers in these stories are by and large like backstabbing, conniving, lying perverts, like with an emphasis on the pervert part. They're powerful, they wield power, but they're not like, I don't know, Saruman or something like that. They're just like numbnuts in a lot of ways. I don't know how else to say it. I love the way he describes sorcerers. Nobody likes the sorcerers. There's one sorcerer, there's one guy that is a regular dude that proceeds to follow the path of a sorcerer. Yoen, if I remember his name because it almost sounds Asian, Yoen. And he's not that bad, but he's still a conniving little bastard. So I like the way Stern writes about sorcerers. How could I say this? Because again, there's nothing like political or anything. None of these, I'll say it this way. All of these stories feel deliberately not modern. Like there's no modern, these could have been written 100 years ago or something like that, in my opinion anyways, for the most part. There's a couple of things that are a little bit modern, but I guess the themes in these stories are not modern at all. And therefore, there is no political correctness, woke stuff. I don't even know if people still use the terms political correctness and woke. It's kind of an old-fashioned way of talking about things. I know that the concerns about political correctness and wokeism and all that sort of thing, it's not even present anymore. It was a big thing like 5 years ago, whatever. But for whatever reason in like the literature world, it still has a grip on a lot of these authors. And it ruins a lot of otherwise good stories. It's even pervasive in the sword and sorcery genre, which is weird to me. But it's there. It's there in other authors' work. It is absolutely not anywhere in Monte Cristo Stern's stories. And that, like I said, that's not to say that any of these stories have any sort of ideology in place of it. A lot of guys, when they take that out, they put something else in that's just as obnoxious from the other direction. Stern doesn't do that. So because of that, all of these stories feel very not modern. What else do I like? What's another good quality? I would say this is good and bad, but I'll put it on a good category first. Uncertainty. The collection begins with a very uncertain, short story. Not going to tell you much about it because I'll give it away, but the collection ends with the characters from that first story reconvening, similarly uncertain at the end. So it begins with uncertainty and ends with uncertainty. And many of these stories have open endings where you don't know exactly what's going to happen to the protagonist after the story concludes. And in such a way, this is good because, again, it sparks my imagination. I have a sense that these stories are written like about, they're a pivotal moment in these protagonists' lives, but not the most epic moment in these protagonists' lives. So something happens to them in the stories that changes them or impacts them in such a way, and then the story ends. And then you're left to wonder, so what is this person going to do now? And your imagination starts going and the gears start turning in your brain. And you're like, holy crap, okay, this is going to be epic. And I can imagine what that is. He didn't write about it. It's not the story. The epic part is not necessarily the story. The epic part is the unwritten story that takes place. So what you're reading about is the things that sort of, I don't want to say made the character because they're all mostly established before the story begins, but something happens that impacts them in such a way. So I think I'm putting that in the good category now because from a reader perspective, the stories will hang with you after you're done and you'll think about them. And if you talk to other people about them, it'll give you stuff to discuss. You'll be like, what do you think happens after this? And you could talk about it. And I think that overall uncertainty of each of these stories, that's kind of where I get my thought about this being an allegory for stuff. People are desperate right now. Like, and this is not a United States thing. This is not a Europe thing. Most of the globe, people are kind of like, they're struggling. They feel disposable. They feel helpless. They feel like there's forces happening in the world, decisions being made that affect them, and they've got nothing, they can't control any of that. They're at the whims of whatever kingdom they're part of, kind of trembling and crumbling around them. I think there's a general sense of that in our world today. And these stories, I think they really do echo that sentiment very well. Again, I don't know if any of that's intentional. I have no idea whatsoever, but it feels that way. I take that back as a good, because sometimes when I read fiction, especially stuff that has any sort of fantasy element in it, this is not a fantasy, this is not high fantasy, it's Sword and Sorcery, but you get what I'm saying, right? I sometimes have trouble like relating any of that back. Like, so what do I do with what I just read? I mean, I'm not an escapist. I don't read for escapism. I love the world that I'm in. I have no reason to escape it. So I try to do that, try to bring it back. And that's what I get from Kingdoms Trembling, is that these are stories that sort of echo the current sentiments of today. And I'm putting that in the good category. This is the final good thing I'm going to say, because whether it was intentional or not, it was effective. From an objective perspective, looking at that, it works. It was a successful thing that happened, making this an allegory for the uncertainty of today. That's what I got to say about good. Now let's talk about the bad. All right, I've recorded this take a few times because I don't want to come off sounding the wrong way. I have a tendency, I could sound arrogant or conceited and stuff, and I don't intend to do that at all. I really don't mean to do that. The bad is the same as the good. That uncertainty for me is also what's bad about Kingdoms Trembling. I understand why people feel uncertain. I understand why they don't see a clearly discernible path to prosperity right now. And I understand why they feel that there's people pulling the strings, setting them up to fail. All of that is very understandable. I get it. And I could even understand why someone would want to write stories about that. Not saying that he did write, Stern wrote about that in particular. This could just be my interpretation. He could tell me I'm wrong about all that. But I can understand why somebody might want to do it. It's just that I wouldn't. Like, I wouldn't invest all the time it takes to write a 240 or 50 page book where almost all of the stories end with that level of uncertainty. It's a weird thing to do, in my opinion. If I'm gonna invest that much time in something, I'm not saying everything has to have a happy ending. I'm not saying that at all, but I just would want the overall message to my audience to be that of, you've got some autonomy in this world. You know, you do have willpower. It's very trendy right now. It's horribly trendy right now to like deny the existence of willpower. That will is a myth. That, you know, we're all just one domino in a series of dominoes going back eons and eons and eons and eons, and our decisions aren't really our own decisions. We're programmed to act in a certain way. People love that. Like, most philosophers this day have eaten that up, especially the YouTube philosophers. If you watch any of the, I don't know, Alex O'Connors out there in the world, like this is all their cup of tea, and it's just a trend right now, and it's going to die out. But there's a certain echoing of that in these stories that kind of gives me it chafes me a little bit. So that's why I put this in the bad category, because I don't think that that's true. I get why people feel that way. I just don't know if that feeling is rational, I guess is what I'm saying. And then on top of that, and I counted this, there's 12 stories. 6 of the 12 stories, the protagonist survives or achieves what he was hoping to achieve as the result of luck. So something happens environmentally around the person, or they stumble across something and they didn't have to think through what they stumbled across or anything. It just happens. Like existence gave them something that allowed them to thrive throughout the story. And if that happens inconsequentially here or there, that's fine, because luck exists. People are lucky, right? It's just that when it's like a key moment of the story, during the climax of the story, and that person succeeds because of luck, half of the stories kind of have that, and I don't like that so much. I really don't. I think, especially when it comes to sword and sorcery, where historically, sword and sorcery, the protagonists are often very volitional. And they're the kind of characters that would scoff at even the notion of luck. Or they might take advantage of luck when it happens, but they wouldn't rely on luck. So again, it's not every story in here, but it all kind of ties in. That whole theme of like just not being in control of your own destiny and a certain level of uncertainty where things are so uncertain that you almost have to rely on luck to survive. That is pervasive throughout these stories, and I don't like it. That's the bad. All right, the ugly. I put this on my paper to talk about something that's ugly, and I don't even know why I did that, because there's nothing ugly in this collection. Whenever people do reviews like the good, the bad, and the ugly is kind of just like this sort of like obscure pet peeve of theirs, I suppose. So that's what I'll do. The ugly for me is vocabulary. Like I mentioned a couple times in this video already, I struggle with the way things are pronounced. This is a Zaremba problem. You're not going to have this issue. You're probably better at language than I am, but I would read a name of a person and remember the shape of that name, but there's a lot of names that have X's in them and apostrophes and stuff like that in the middle of the name, that after a while, they all kind of blend together for me. And I found myself, when a character is referenced later on in a different story, like a call and response to this character, his endeavors and stuff, I didn't even realize, I didn't catch it was the same dude. And then I have to go back and reread it. And this is a deficiency I have. I can't pronounce these names, all this kind of stuff. This is a Zaremba problem, but that's the thing. I just wish, I'm not saying that your barbarian has to be named Bob. It doesn't have to be Bob the Barbarian, but I don't know. Something that I guess maybe just rolls off the tongue. Keep it Latin. That's probably the thing. Latin seems like it just works the best for me. So make them Latin. Just make everybody an Italian or something, and I'll be fine with it. That's the ugly. It's that, and then maybe the world building on the same thing. Remembering it's all the same thing. Just remembering the places and stuff like that. And like there's a different word for, like in that one quote I read, the outer yachts. Yachts are like provinces, from what I understand. So he refers to them as a yacht because in this kingdom, the outer provinces of the kingdom, there's different little, jurisdictions or whatever, right? Well, just call it a province, like in my opinion, because you're using other words that, why do they call it a sword in this fictional land? Why not have a different name for something as fundamental as a sword? But you use the word sword to describe a sword. So why not just use the word province to describe a province? Those kind of decisions are weird for me. And I struggle with that in all of this whole genre. I struggle with that. I always have, and I always will. This is not like a critique of Mephisto Stern in particular. It's just a critique. It's not even a critique. It's a deficiency. I'm rambling. Everyone, as soon as I get to the end of these videos, there's like 3 of you still watching, and you're defective for watching. You should have gone and done something else at this point. Your family's out there calling you. Your grass needs mowed. Your dog needs fed. You've probably been neglecting your children, and you're watching me yammer on about stuff. At this point, how long is this video already? I just need to press the button and stop it. But I got to do my final thing. I got to tell you who this is all for. Who's this collection for? All right, just let me wrap this whole thing up. Who is this collection for? Kingdom's Trembling is for people that like well-written prose that gets to the point, but can be beautiful and poetic when necessary, only when necessary. Very efficient use of language in all of these stories. I love it. It's for people like that. It's for people that like world building, but don't want to be beaten over the head with a million adjectives about the world. Same thing with description. It's for people that like to read just enough to get their imagination. It's for people with imagination. God damn it. There are so many people that like this kind of stuff that have no imagination. I've talked to them. There are a lot of people, there's a lot of authors out there who write this sort of stuff that you could just tell by interacting with them that they've never imagined anything. They don't know how to have an imagination. So it's for people that have an imagination and want to read something that is not withholding information as an act of laziness, but is withholding information deliberately and appropriately to kindle that imagination. It's for people that like stories that do not have any sort of bias. There's no ideology anywhere in these stories. No matter where you sit on this side of the aisle or that side of the aisle, whatever building you're in that has an aisle, or hopefully you're not even in the building, that's what I'd recommend, is get out of the building. But if you're in the building with aisles and you got to choose a side, no matter what side you sit on, you're going to be fine with this collection. It just removes the burden of that. Just reading something that's contemporary, that removes the burden from the reader to have to put things in those categories, in those boxes, is just so refreshing and wonderful to read. And then finally, it's for people along the same lines with imagination, the people that either have a sense of uncertainty in their lives and they want to read something that reinforces that, because that is a thing. There were negative qualities, and I call that a negative quality. The negative qualities that I have, and when I'm feeling these negative sensations, I'll go out and pursue something that reinforces that negativity. And somehow, magically, in the process of doing that, it negates it. It's almost like two wrongs make a right. in a weird way, it's kind of what it is. Hopefully you know what I'm saying. If you feel helpless right now, and you know yourself well enough to know that if you read something with a bunch of other people that are kind of helpless at the same time, they're not wussies. These people are, they're not wimps, right? They're doing something, but they're not always as successful as you would want them to be, perhaps. But I'm rambling. You get what I'm saying? If you can handle that and it reinforces that for you in a positive way, which is possible, then this is for you. That's it. This is so long. Go spend time with your family, feed your dog, water your plants. Thanks for watching. See you later.